Hey everybody, I hope you're doing well, everything going on and all that. I hope you like scansion. It was pretty hard. I mean, scansion's just difficult in general. Normally we get to spend a lot more time on it, but I hope you like scansion and rhyme and got something out of it. Really kind of the nuts and bolts of poetry and figuring out, like, why something sounds good when it's read aloud as opposed to, like, oh, that sounds good, but, it has, like, some sort of, like, sneaky meter to it that you didn't realize before. This week is our vocabulary test. So we're going to have the vocabulary test and the techniques test, and before that, just like a brief little lesson. So I'm going to go over the lesson real quick, over the words bolded on the page, which are caesura, persona, lyric, narrative, image, cacophony, and euphony. These are pretty just minor things that, like they should just be on the test, but they're pretty easy to pick up. And it's things that you probably already know or have noticed. And it's just like a formal way of defining them. Now, I think we've gone over caesura before, but just go over it real quick. There's an example on it, just page 257, line 14, Cheryl Olds, I go back to May. The 14th line is, don't do it, M dash, she's the wrong woman. And I've written that out on the Canvas page, but caesura is just a pause in the middle of a line. It can be a comma, it can be a period, it can be a semicolon or colon, it can be an M dash, it can be any sort of symbol that denotes like a pause or like an interruption, anything like that. Exclamation point, for sure. And when that happens in the middle of the line, that's caesura. A lot of times people will do this just to set each sort of side off more, draw two things that aren't normally seen next to each other together, same thing as enjambment. And also for enjambment to make more interesting line breaks rather than just doing it like clausically, whereas this, like, each line is just a clause of a sentence, where like making the sentences break in a different way than you expect, which can get quite boring. Persona, it's kind of another word for the speaker of the poem, but with the understanding that the speaker can be an inanimate or inanimate, can be an animate person or an inanimate object. I'm sure we've mentioned it a long time ago before in class, but like a lot of times poems, their speakers will be inanimate things like food or like your socks or like something that can't really talk, like a cat or dog. Those are normally called persona poems because the poem is wrapped up, like a good deal of the poem's identity is in the speaker, but every poem has a persona. And that persona is never really the author. Like, even if the author's like, this is a confessional poet, this is a confessional poem, something that I've written, it's still always the persona of the I. There's always just sort of another layer, another mask of even what we think we are or how we view ourselves versus what we actually are. So there's always a persona in a poem. Sometimes it's just like the unnamed I in a lyric poem. Sometimes it's like a cat or dog or cactus or whatever. That sort of thing. The word originally comes from back when they did Greek, back when the Greeks did plays like they don't do now. Back in ancient times, they'd have a stage, but all these people, there were no like microphones or anything. So what they would do to help people hear is they would have these giant masks on sticks, like giant, like 3 feet tall, huge, that they'd hold up, and like it'd be like a sad one or an angry one or a happy one. So people from far away could get it, and all of these masks would have not microphones, but megaphones inside them to project the voice. I should have one of those all the time, so you don't have to crank up all the volume all the way to hear me. That's persona. So persona is just the speaker, whether it be animate or inanimate or unnamed. That's the persona. Lyric poetry we've talked about. Sappho invented the lyric poem. Adrian Rich is another good example of a lyric poem. Lyric poems are short, emotive, and song-like. They often slow down time. Yeah. There's not really much to it there. We've gone over it pretty often. Narrative, and a poem is just like narrative and anything else. It's a story. Narrative and lyricism aren't necessarily at odds with each other, though they are kind of hard to get to work together. If someone describes a poem as narrative, it often means that it has longer lines, is maybe a little more plain spoken, and focuses more on like telling a story through verse. But I mean, all stories used to be poems. It wasn't until Frankenstein that like stories were not told in verse and stuff like that. But so that's just a narrative poem, nothing, or narrative in poetry. It's still just a story being told through the lines. Next up is an image. So image has two meanings. They kind of overlap, obviously. But first and foremost, an image is a sensory description. And there's an example of that in the first stanza of Keats' St. Agnes, which I'll read real quick on page 68. Eve of St. Agnes. St. Agnes' Eve, bitter chill it was. The owl for all his feathers was a cold. The hare limped trembling through the frozen grass, and silent was the flock in woolly fold. Numb were the beadsman's fingers while he told his rosary, and while his frosted breath, like pious incense from a censer old, seemed taking flight for heaven without the death. Past the sweet Virgin's picture while his prayer he saith. Messed up a few words there, but that's okay. But you can see that Keats is using a lot of imagery, and that imagery is a sensory description. Now, it's not just saying that, like, oh, the fence is brown. It's something, well, I guess that is technically imagery, but it's something that the five senses can apprehend and grasp. So they like smell, sound, taste, sight, touch, that sort of thing. And also, the second definition is using that as a metaphor. And that's what you really want to do. Like, if in a poem, like, there's a fence outside my window, which is why I'm saying that, like, the fence is brown, the grass is green. That's technically imagery, but it's not really getting us a lot of stuff. And looking at the Eve of St. Agnes again, he's showing us not just that it's cold, he's saying that he's seeing the limped trembling of the rabbit through the frozen grass. Even the owl is cold, and he's looking at the beadsman's fingers, which is just, beadsman's is funny, actually. It's just like, when people pray the rosary, there's like, they click beads up and down on like a little kind of bracelet or a chain. I'm sure you've seen like rosaries in movies or something like that, or real life. And it's just a way to keep track of like where you're at in the prayer. And the person's praying, their fingers are so cold that they can barely move it. And their breath, instead of just being like, oh, I could see their breath in the air, their breath was pious incense from a censer old, seemed taking flight for heaven without a death. And that's the second part of imagery. So the first definition of imagery is just a sensory description, something that like we can perceive with our five senses, or also mixing in with a metaphor. So it's like we have this breath going up to heaven, but it's like pious incense. So Keats is doubling down on the religious imagery. Incense is something you burn at an altar, or in one of those, I forget what they're called. Vespers is the time when they use it, but sometimes they'll have like a swinging little brazier that they burn incense in, and it smokes, and they like swing it. He was comparing his breath to that as he's saying a prayer. So we see that the imagery is also a metaphor, while also being something that is something that's grounded in reality that we can perceive with our physical senses. So imagery is a sensory description, sometimes mixed with metaphor. So like in this one, it's like religious imagery. It's like 90s, it's religious imagery. In other poems, it can be like militaristic imagery or stuff like that. But just something to keep up on. It's kind of the lifeblood of poetry, so. And then we have cacophony and euphony. And these are pretty simple general terms. We've talked about consonants and assonants, the repetition of consonant sounds and vowel sounds. Cacophony and euphony are even broader. Cacophony, and like, the easiest way to remember these is just to remember how the words sound when you say them loud, like cacophony. Means unpleasant, harsh sounds in a poem, used to suggest tension, used to suggest negative things, like anger, grief, anything like that. Think of it like cacophony of like, if you've ever heard like crows or like a really harsh guttural sounding of like flock of birds go off all at once, like that's a cacophony for sure. And when you see that in a poem, it means the author is just put that in intentionally for whatever effect they're trying to do or underscore. Euphony is the opposite. Euphony is just pleasant sounds in a poem. Those can be vowel sounds, those are our favorites. But, human beings, we like patterns, so even if it's just like lots of T sounds in a pleasing pattern in a meter, that can be good. We also like resonant consonants, which are L and R. We really like L sounds, we really like R sounds too. Just in terms of like linguistic phenomenology. But yeah, euphony is pleasant sounds, cacophony is unpleasant sounds, harsh sounds. Um, Another way to remember it is the Latin roots. EU is just like good. CA usually means bad, like catastrophe, starts with a CA. And I'm pretty sure it comes from that. And EU. But think of like euphemism, which is it's when in euphemism, like instead of saying like something nasty, you say like a polite term to cover it up. A euphemism just means like EU means good, and feminism basically boils down to like speech or phrase. So you're using you're using a good word to cover over a bad one. To another way to remember it. But yeah, that's just a little lesson on a few basic things that just should be on the quiz, just to sort of like ground and as a grounding for like your poetic framework of technique and vocabulary. But yeah, I don't think there's anything else for vocabulary, so I'll just go over the test real quick. It's in 3 parts. It's about 35 questions, multiple choice, matching, and short answer. It'll probably take you a good bit of time depending on how prepared you are. I would guess probably around an hour. Yeah. The multiple choice, it's multiple choice. It's not too bad. Multiple choice is basically concerned about identification. The matching is all about rhyme, actually, so you'll just be matching up different types of rhyme with their definitions. And then the short answer covers a whole variety of things. And a lot of times I will ask pretty specific questions about like what are the differences between these 3 types of like closely related forms of poetry, or I'll just be like identify where this part is at in the sonnet or the villanelle, or even just be like write an example of this type of rhyme, that sort of thing. So the short answer will probably take a good bit. It's mostly multiple choice and short answer. The matching is a small section in the middle. But yeah, that's due midnight at Friday. You have the whole week to do it, so no great shakes or anything. Next week is Maggie Nelson's Bluets, which I'm excited for. It's a really interesting book of prose poetry that I think we'll like, and it all revolves around the color blue, which is quite nice. The format will be the same as Citizen. I think I'll probably just do one due by Thursday, one due by Friday. I'm sure most of you will just, knock it out earlier in the week if you have time and stuff like that. After Bluets, we're having our workshop week, so part of Bluets, while we read Bluets and stuff like that, there will also be stuff where I'll just explain what I expect of you in workshop, how we're going to do it. I'll have another screencast like I did for Better Reverse of how to use the tools in Canvas that you're going to be having to do the peer review, how much expect you to write, how many comments, that sort of thing, and then after that, it's the last week. And I think with that, it's just going to be the final, what's happening in the final portfolio is on the syllabus, but I'll probably just write it out a little bit more, make a short video explaining sort of what I expect from it and stuff like that. The thing about revising it, because some of it is a research assignment, and you don't exactly have the library you can go to. So I'm thinking about revising that a little bit, but it's a pretty minor research assignment one way or another. And you can still log into the library remotely and stuff like that to get access to articles. So, but also I'll look at it and I'll have that for you soon. I hope. Everything's crazy, obviously, but we're all doing the best we can. But I don't think anything in particular will be going on the last week of class. I'm pretty sure the final portfolio I'm just gonna have due sometime during the exam week. I think on even the revised syllabus I have it due the first day of exam week at midnight, because that's when our exam was. I'm probably gonna move it to later in exam week because that just seems a bit rough. Probably Wednesday at midnight or something like that. So then I have a couple days to look over them and get the grades in before they close, and then I can also respond and give feedback and stuff like that. And for the workshop week too, I'm getting ahead of myself. This is all stuff that you'll do later, but just have 2 poems in mind that you want your classmates to look at, And I think, I'm going. I might as well keep going. But that final week will just be conferences. I'm pretty sure they're just going to be optional, but it's highly encouraged you sign up. I can look at a couple more of your poems, maybe the ones that went through workshop, maybe the ones that you didn't. pretty sure the final portfolio calls for 5 revisions of poems, and then just like a little write up about some other stuff. But yeah, yeah. So looking vision into the future there, but we really only have. I mean, not really. We only have a month left of class, which is crazy. Time feels like it's moving really slowly, but I guess it's also whenever I look at the calendar, it seems like it's later than I think it is. So, I don't know where Jasper is. I think he's just sleeping in the living room. So, oh, well, good luck on the test. Let me know if you have any questions about a certain definition or anything before going into the test, and I'll do my best to answer. So, all right, everyone, have a good day. Be safe. Oh, he doesn't like it. I did interrupt his lunch. Actually, I can't end a video with I can't end a video without you being here, huh? Oh, I'm getting chomped. Oh, he's vicious. Alright. Bye, Jasper. Bye, everybody. He scurry away.